Hi, welcome to Udacity Thought Webinar Series. Today I am joined with Sue Barsamian. Sue Barsamian is independent director in 4 amazing tech companies in the Bay Area. Prior to that, she was a senior leader EVP at Hewlett-Packard and the software division of Hewlett-Packard. And personally, I have worked with Sue for more than 10 years, and she has been a mentor, amazing mentor to me. Sue, welcome to the series.
Thank you. A thrill to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So Sue, I have been inspired by the number of companies that you have worked in and the number of roles that you have done. 8 companies through your career. And the amazing roles that you have done, it's pretty unheard of. I would like you to talk about your career and what were some of the incredible opportunities that you had and share some of the outcomes from there.
Well, I've loved it. I'm now doing the board work, as you said, but I had 37 years as an operator, and I was fortunate enough to work for 8 great companies. But when you look at the number of roles, I think the number of roles was something like 24. I mean, it was huge.
That's huge.
Yeah. So I had a lot of roles. And, I subscribe to the career concept of it's both a jungle gym and a ladder, which means going sideways is often, whereas people think they need to continue to progress up and up and up, a lot of value comes out of going sideways. So I did several jumps in my career from being a pre-sales person to being a sales manager, from being in sales to suddenly being in marketing, to running cybersecurity.
Yes, that was like totally
out of the blue. And at the time, you're like, wow, this is different, and I don't really know anything about this. And yet it ends up being amazing. And then 10, 20 years down the road, you look back and you realize how each of those helped you to just get a much more holistic view of the company.
Can you point out during that journey, was there any critical moment that actually changed your trajectory?
Well, certainly when Meg, and Robert at the time talked to me about running cyber, that was a real critical point in my trajectory, because while I haven't stayed in cybersecurity, you can't go into cybersecurity in my mind and ever come out completely, because it's such a mission and it's such a passion for everybody that's in it, because it's such a big problem in the world. And so that was really pivotal for me in that I will never let go of some element of cybersecurity now in my board portfolio or in what I do in my daily life.
And I've seen some of that carrying through in your board positions.
Yeah, on the board of Symantec, and that's a great example.
Yeah. So I know that back in HP, there were a lot of female leaders, the women leaders, who you were a great role model for. What would be your advice for these type of female leaders who are just about starting their career and who want to grow into the role similar to you?
Well, I do a lot of those conversations, and I was lucky to have, incredible mentors as well at HP. Ann Livermore, Meg Whitman, and the advice that I give in general, and it's gender agnostic, which I think is in many cases the best advice, which is stay close to the product or stay close to the customer. And there are many, many great roles in a company, but no matter how you do your job, the closer you are to really understanding the customer, and the closer you are to really understanding the product and what makes the business of the company run, I think the better you're going to be at whatever you're doing. And thus, from an advancement perspective, the more likely you are to advance.
I think that's a very good advice. Basically, just to paraphrase, either you are part of building or you are part of selling.
Yeah, and many people phrase it that way, which is also great. And sometimes that can make you feel, the only thing I don't resonate with that way of phrasing is it kind of makes you feel like if you're not in R&D or you're not in sales, you're not useful to the company. So I modified it to basically be whatever you're doing for the company, make sure you understand the customer and make sure you understand the offering and that will make you more valuable at whatever you're doing and more likely to progress, even if it's not in sales or in product.
I actually like your modification.
You like my modification?
I do.
I'm going to trademark that, yeah.
Go for it. So you spoke about mentors and them playing an important role in your life. I think there are mentors, there are role models. If you have to look through your 30 plus years of career, who would you think who inspired you most professionally?
I've been lucky in that I've had many amazing bosses and also just many amazing peers. Sometimes it's the peers. One of my best friends today who has really mentored me through many of my career decisions is Bethany Mayer, who sat across the aisle from me at HP for years. And those relationships are incredibly valuable. In fact, I just called her 3 days ago to say, I have a decision I need to make. I need your advice. And so those are great. At the boss level, one of my best mentors was Tom Hogan, who when Mercury was acquired by HP, Tom ran the software division, and he mentored me through many job transitions and many just day-to-day decisions. But I remember, as you talk about kind of pivotal points in your career, one of them for me was getting my first senior vice president job at HP, and that was a big deal. And I remember him coaching me through the process, and then at some point saying, this thing is not going to drop in your lap. If you want it, you need to go for it. And I said, oh, okay, you're right. And I remember calling Ann Livermore, who was in Tokyo at the time, on her cell phone and saying, hey, I know you're in the process. I know that, we've had a couple discussions about this, but I really want the job. And here's the 3 reasons why I think I'm the right person for the job. And I think that conversation was pivotal to me ultimately getting the job. And I think if Tom hadn't kicked me a little bit in the pants, I don't think I would have called Ann, and who knows whether I would have gotten the job.
Yeah. So one more thing that I've observed in you, that you have moved from one role to another, be it channel to cybersecurity to software, and many a times that also meant working across heavily metrixed organizations, and companies like HP could be very metrixed as well. And you have been very effective working across them. Can you share with us some examples or some best practices around how to be effective across, what leadership traits are needed?
Yeah, it's a great question. And quite frankly, in a large organization, it's the only path to success, because unless you're the CEO, anything you do at scale in a large organization requires influencing people that don't work for you. You usually have a lot of people that do work for you, but the hard problems require an army to be mobilized sometimes, and that army is largely somebody else's. And I think it comes down to understanding people, appreciating people, and wanting to understand what defines other people's success. And also, I think that's a good mantra in sales as well. Everybody thinks about the art of selling. Well, the art of selling is understanding how you make your customers successful. And when customers have the opportunity to be successful and are successful, they buy, and they buy more. And I think it's the same in a large corporate environment where you're matrixed. There's some science to the part of, do you really understand clearly defined roles and responsibilities, and how do you divide a complicated task up into departmental responsibilities? So there is a science to that. We used to say, you can't gang tackle everything like you're a 7-year-old soccer team, right? You gotta have some logic to the way you're dividing and conquering. But then there's an art to it, which is, how do you make the other people in that process successful in what they need to achieve? And there's nothing in that says you take credit for everything, right? And I think that's really important. You give everybody in the matrix credit. And at the end of the day, when you take that approach, it all ends up coming back to benefit you.
I totally agree with you. I'm going to shift the gears a little bit.
Okay, fine.
There are a lot of females, there are a lot of, rising women who look up to you and want to
thank
be
you.
like you. So I would like to talk about what do you think is missing in preparing the girls, in preparing the women out here in US or in educating them to be successful?
Well, it's very sector specific, right? In healthcare, obviously, there are a lot of women. And so there are some in education, there are a lot of women. The conversation and probably the nature of your question
Is in tech.
Right? And I think what's missing in tech, and the good news is, this is not a new topic, and you see amazing initiatives now for girls at the middle school level, but it really does start early. And it's not necessarily about putting a computer in the hands of a girl when she's 9, although that's very helpful. It's about fundamental differences in the way girls play versus the way boys play, and the lack of mechanical exposure that the girls have, fixing things exposure. I mean, if you just look at the childhood of a boy versus the childhood of a girl, there tends to be a lot more exposure to fixing, tinkering, things that make you feel like you're conquering a problem, and then the confidence that says, I can do it. I would say in the old days, redoing cars, which my husband did as a child. I don't think anybody redoes cars anymore because the engines have changed so dramatically, but that's a good example, right? Just building things, I think, is a very transferable skill into the age of technology and computers, which is all about, building software, having the confidence that you can take something unknown and conquer it.
I think good points. And just to throw something from Udacity, at Udacity, as you know, our key offering is to really educate or reskill people and really transform them from A to B. And we have been partnering with many corporates specifically on their diversity agenda and help especially the female leaders over there to move from position A to position B. For example, somebody who may not be in tech type of job, but they have the right aptitude, we can actually help them become a data scientist or
which is,
learning.
It's one of the reasons I love the mission of Udacity, and I think it really is the wave of the future, to just constantly give people the ability to skill and reskill.
So let's assume that the education level is fixed. We have same number of females and males entering the workforce, but I believe that there is still something happening in the corporate side, and there are some barriers to female leadership. Can you talk about what are the most significant barriers? You may have experienced some of them as well. What's stopping them?
Well, at the end of the day, there comes a point where it's just balance. And I'm going to talk about it from that perspective versus glass ceilings or what have you, because I think while those things still exist, I think they're getting better all the time. I think what you see in terms of the attrition of women at the middle management level, right? Because there are plenty of girls graduating in computer science these days. There are plenty of young women entering the workforce, and then you see a fall off at the kind of mid-career middle management level. And I think it comes down to balance, right? And it comes down to, kids, school, home, there's so many hours in the day, and there are so many things competing for time, and people still also want a quality of life. And so I always looked at that as a reason to mentor mid-career women, but also a reason to mentor mid-career men. And I think those are really related. And let's say that it's a traditional household, which it's not necessarily, but I'll just use that as my example, where there's, a husband and a wife, and at the end of the day, it could be the husband that's on your team. And you want to make sure the husband is going home to do the school pickup,
Right.
making the soccer game, that the husband has the flexibility to also be an equal participant in the household. And that applies, that's gender neutral. Whatever the home situation is, whatever the partnership model is, you want to make sure that the company is promoting equal partnership and balance at home. Mm-hmm. And that means not just mentoring the young women, because often that's not the problem. So you got to look at both sides of the equation.
Yeah. No, I think that all makes sense. But as you know, it evolves, right? Whatever are the big pain points or situation now could be different 5 years down the line or 10 years down the line. So what do you think would be the big challenges facing the female leaders or the women leaders, that are coming after you, and what advice would you have for them?
Just be confident in the difference you make. I think it's interesting. Korn Ferry came out with the latest survey today of the Russell 3000 index, which basically showed that in the first 24 months of tenure of both a CEO and a CFO, female executives deliver greater return to the shareholders. So there's nothing to be shy about, right? Diversity matters. Women do very well in executive positions. That no longer needs to be proven. Women just need to be confident in their ability, and companies need to continue to be confident in the knowledge that diversity, and diversity is not just gender diversity, really importantly, that diversity makes a difference, not just culturally, but diversity makes a difference to the bottom line.
I totally agree. So, just talking about diversity, there is a lot of focus these days about diversity, not just gender, but overall diversity. Some companies and some leaders talk about it more than others.
Yeah.
What would your advice be to the leaders on this topic?
It doesn't just happen.
Yeah.
And, we saw that in our time together at HP, and, we could argue both sides of the discussion on quotas versus not quotas. But at the end of the day, first of all, I don't think, while I'm sure there are examples out there, I don't think people are intentionally not diverse. But there have been many studies that show the concept of majority bias, right? If you're interviewing a candidate and 3 out of 5 people on the interviewing team are male, I think the odds are like 70% that you'll hire male. It's unconscious majority bias. And so as a company, the reason why I think targets help is oftentimes that's the only way to break through what is an unconscious, not a conscious bias, but it's just, it is a bias, right? Yeah. It's the unconscious majority bias. And when you put a target in place, it causes people to take a step back and say, I'm going to have to recruit differently. I'm going to have to get a different candidate pool, but I'm also going to have to get a different interviewing process. And that's good. And sometimes just in the day-to-day mayhem, I'll say, of a day in the life of a company, people just don't have time to take a step back and reset their processes like that, unfortunately, unless they're forced to.
Yeah. I think in addition to, as you said, putting some kind of targets, that actually helps. Yeah. That brings some of the unconscious bias out, but also maybe training the leaders, the hiring managers and leaders on the unconscious bias, so that they are self-aware.
Yeah, people don't. It is unconscious.
Yeah.
People aren't intentionally, being that way, but it is just, unfortunately, something we need to be aware of.
So let's pivot back to technology, and you have been now for last year or so in some of the amazing companies as independent board director, and you have been working with a lot of new and upcoming companies, if you will. What's your sense on where is it all moving? What are some of the key trends you are seeing in the market these days?
Well, it's incredibly energizing to have the luxury of doing this at this point in life. And I'm incredibly confident in the future. When I've been in Silicon Valley for 40 years now, and I was excited when I arrived from Kansas as a 21-year-old. And I'm still excited with all the pros and cons of living in the Valley, these days, the cost, the traffic, the what have you. It's an incredibly exciting place. And what I love right now is that I see entrepreneurs being very mission-oriented, which has always been part of the culture of the Valley. Our time at HP, we can attest to that. Sometimes you wonder whether that has gone by the wayside, but I see it alive and well in great companies. I think Udacity is a wonderful example of that. I think the way in which, we know that there was a wave in the Valley of kind of social media and social media disruption, and it felt like at some point all anybody was doing was building new social media platforms. No, I'm not knocking it, but but now I see between AI and ML and some of these really disruptive technologies, people focusing on the disruption of kind of fundamental business processes or fundamental things that we do in our day-to-day life in a highly transformative way, which is really exciting.
Yeah. Funny that you talk about the AI, ML, and data science and cloud, all of these new technologies coming in, but it has an impact. This whole automation that it brings it's impacting. Over the next 10 years, World Economic Forum, they predict that over 800 million jobs will be lost to automation as a result of these new technologies coming in. And almost 375 to 400 million employees in the existing corporates, they will have to reskill themselves to stay relevant in those companies. So we are looking at 1.2 billion people problem over the next 10 years.
I completely agree, and I think there's not enough, still not enough of a focus on it, and I think it will disrupt the notion that you go to college for 4 years, you train for something, and then you have a career. And it's not that you won't go through that process, but it will turn it into a continuous lifelong cycle. And I think and the good news is there are companies like Udacity, taking that charge. But I think it's a sea change. And I'm not sure it has, other than people like you, I'm not sure it has really landed as the new. Yeah.
And as you know, my reason to join Udacity from HP was when we were driving that whole digital transformation program, it required training 15,000 people, right?
Yeah.
And I spent about $15 million creating our own trainings, but the biggest feedback I got was those trainings were not really that impactful when we were training. And
I think I may have given you that feedback.
Yes, you did. You did. So that led me to thinking that there has to be a better way to solve that problem.
Yeah.
Corporates, they are spending $1.2 trillion just in 2019 driving digital transformation. But their core competency is making products and selling those products to the customer. Their core competency is not to transform the workforce or not to create those training programs. And that's where company like Udacity come into picture.
It's really interesting because when a company sells a product externally, there's a keen understanding of the difference between the sale and actually getting the customer to value.
Yes.
And now with the onset of customer success and the understanding is the end game is getting the customer to value, not getting the sale. And yet in the world of internal digital transformation, it tends to be the delivery of the stuff.
Yes.
And the landing it with the employees such that it actually transforms the business process it was designed to transform, which at the end of the day will depend on the people.
Exactly.
Actually making that happen, that gets
lost. Yes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's a 1.2 billion people opportunity.
Yeah.
And if you even take it outside of the whole veneer of Silicon Valley that where we live in, wherein people have opportunities to go work and all. But if you go to Midwest, the Rustic Belt, there are a lot of jobs are just getting disrupted. People working in manufacturing and those kind of domains, 4.0, 3.9s, and they are either making just $40,000 or sometimes not even enough to sustain the family. Do you think that there is something big that needs to happen, like in US or otherwise globally, to enable that workforce to be able to work from where they are located, but they can still contribute to global?
Yeah, I think there are some really interesting initiatives, and it's a combination of a number of things. First of all, we all worked for companies that in the last 15 to 20 years offshored, BPO to India, to China. And, if you look at, while that is still a very attractive proposition, India's gotten increasingly more competitive. And as that happens, it gets more expensive. China's complicated these days just because of the geopolitical environment. And there's a really cool movement now towards reviving or reskilling untapped areas of opportunity in the U.S. Whether that's going to a Rust Belt city and reskilling. If you look even locally, one of our local congressmen, Ro Khanna, just announced with he's a Democratic congressman, just announced with the Republican governor of Iowa a tech partnership for Valley companies that can no longer sustain the level of skilled resources they need here just because of the competitiveness of the labor market, the cost. Able to now partner with a tech hub in Iowa located in the area of lots of universities that are graduating, and junior colleges as well, graduating tech skilled people. And really forming a satellite. And I think that I love that. We just need to do more of that. There is so much opportunity to have a dramatically lower cost point in the U.S. with the availability of skilled labor.
Yeah, totally agree. In fact, we at Udacity just 2 weeks back, we signed a pledge with White House and the U.S. government that we would offer 100,000 scholarships across all of U.S. for America's workers over the next 5 years.
For nano degrees?
For nano degrees, yes.
Awesome. Oh, that's great. I didn't realize that. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, we are going to work across different states and local governments so that we go to the different parts of U.S. and provide the America's workers equal opportunity.
Yeah. I think that's the future.
Yeah. I think the key out here is that the talent doesn't need to be clustered in just some of the areas like Silicon Valley or the Austin or the Dallas of the world or the Tri-Valley and all of those places. I think if we are the technical hub out here. We have provided the 5G connections, now 4G and 5G. Talent can reside anywhere, right?
Yeah. And that's incredibly empowering, not only for those communities. But you get so many benefits. It's empowering for women because they often end up getting the flexibility to work, differently. There are just so many good things that come out of it, and I'm really excited by what I see Ro doing with the governor of Iowa, and I think that can be a model for what these tech hubs do to kind of reach into the untapped communities in the U.S.
With all of these in mind, what would be your suggestions for executives of today and executives of future who are going to be who are running the companies, who are going to be the leaders of the future?
I will take a phrase from one of my board companies and an amazing CEO, Nick Mehta of Gainsight, who you know.
Yeah.
And one of Gainsight's core values is human first. And I love that. And Nick is able to do that while still running a very buttoned up company that delivers against its targets. But I think what that means is that you need to think about both the community and the world you live in. And we're seeing social responsibility and corporate, leaders taking a responsibility for world change increasingly, and that's, I think, one aspect of human first. And then the other is, employees, right? You need to think about your employees as people. You need to develop them, and it's not just about free food, right? It's how do they feel valued? How do they feel like they are learning from people they respect, and that there's a path for them in their career and in their life to just be a good person.
Cannot agree more on that one. I think that's a really amazing takeaway. So I appreciate you coming here and sharing some amazing insights with us. And
thank you.
Really,
it's great to see you.
Yeah. And for our viewers today, we hope to see you next month.